"You're trespassing, Thalia. One more step and I will defend myself." That was Marla Vexley, president of the Brindle Hollow HOA. Her voice rang across the Silver Grove fountain like it belonged to a god, confident, practiced, cold. She was holding a pistol. Thalia didn't move. My niece just stood there barefoot on the sun-warmed stone, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. She wore earbuds, not fear. She didn't even hear Marla scream the words, but I did. I was 20 yards away, and running. "You're not allowed here. This is a community reflection space," Marla shouted again, pistol raised, aimed. My heart stuttered. And then I heard the sharp mechanical pop. One gunshot, one body dropped. Let me make one thing clear. That fountain was named after my sister. The land it sits on, donated by me when the HOA wanted a memorial site to honor our founding families. The bricks are engraved with names of residents. Thalia's mother, my sister, was the first. Marla knew that. If you're watching this, and you've ever had an HOA go too far, if you've ever buried someone and watched a petty tyrant try to erase what's left, you need to follow now. This story is going to rip through every lie your neighborhood hides behind, and it starts here. My name is Judge Corwin Terrell. I serve on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. I've written decisions that shaped national precedent, but none of it prepared me to bury the last piece of my family. Thalia was 13. She was neurodivergent, gentle, quiet, loved sketching the trees and fountains and shadows. She didn't speak much, but when she drew, she said everything. That fountain? It wasn't just a memorial. It was her anchor. After my sister died in a hospital's negligent hands, Thalia came to live with me. She was 10. She called my late sister Mama. She called me Uncle. And I made her a promise the night I took her in, that no one would ever make her feel like she didn't belong. The HOA didn't like that promise. At first, it was small things, citations for unauthorized use of shared spaces, letters about lingering too long near the benches. Marla herself once said Thalia's sketching looked unstable, as if peace was a threat to order. I tried reason. I cited ADA protections, the HOA charter, even local ordinances. I explained her condition. I showed her ESA documentation, even though we didn't need to. But none of it mattered. Not to Marla Vexley, who once told another resident's teen that children don't set the tone in Brindle Hollow, adults do. And yet, here she was, setting her sights on a barefoot girl with a pencil case. I watched my niece bleed into the stones of the very place built in her mother's memory. I saw neighbors turn away, some frozen, some filming, no one moving. And in that frozen second, Marla holstered her weapon like a traffic warden issuing a ticket. "I felt threatened," she said, aloud. She reached for something. I was the first to kneel, the first to hold Yalia's body. I could still feel the pulse in her wrist, fading like light slipping underwater. The police came, slow, detached. They didn't handcuff Marla. They didn't confiscate the gun. They let her change her statement 3 times before taking her down to the station. And within 12 hours, she was home again, behind her HOA's private security gates. But I wasn't just grieving. I was remembering. I was remembering every clause in that HOA charter, every motion filed at every meeting, every time Marla's name appeared next to a vote about surveillance or youth restrictions or aesthetic regulation. I remember because I'd read them all, years ago, because I helped write the neighborhood's original easement filings, because I knew exactly which lines Marla had crossed, and exactly how to end her publicly. The law won't protect monsters like her, not when the law lives in people like me. This is just the start. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever feared your HOA more than your city council, what happened to Thalia could happen on your street next, and I will make sure the woman who took her never sees daylight again. The morning after the shooting, I found a citation envelope tucked into the deadbolt of my front door. Brindle Hollow. HOA notice of violation. Emergency vehicles cause property disruption to community landscaping. Issued at 3:42 p.m., 4 minutes after the ambulance took Thalia's body away. No signature, no condolence. Just a printed seal and a box checked, action required. I didn't rip it. I folded it, quietly, like you might fold the last note from someone you no longer recognize. Inside, the house was still. Her sketchbook sat on the arm of the couch, open to a half-finished image of a cardinal perched on the lip of the fountain. She'd used red ink for the feathers. That same red still stained the stone under my knees. I didn't cry, not yet. There was too much rage in the way. Marla Vexley hadn't even bothered to hide behind silence. Just hours after the shooting, she sent a neighborhood-wide bulletin. She used the same HOA email list usually reserved for pest control alerts and water outages. Her subject line, incident clarification and temporary safety reminder. She referred to Thalia as a juvenile resident violating community structure guidelines. She said, threatening behavior was observed. She wrote, this is a tragic outcome, but safety enforcement remains paramount at Brindle Hollow. No name, no acknowledgement, no humanity. I called the station again, no update. Still under review. I called the HOA board line, straight to voicemail. Then I called Damon Creel, the vice president. He picked up after the second ring. His voice was brittle. I'm sorry, he said before I could speak. Are you? I asked. I didn't know it would go that far. You watched her escalate for months. You voted with her on every restriction. Marla's persuasive. She runs the meetings. Did she persuade you to aim a gun at a child? He didn't answer. I didn't wait. I walked out to the fountain around noon. A few neighbors passed, most avoiding eye contact. One woman in running shoes offered a nod. That was it. No flowers, no markers, no trace. Except the blood. Still faint in the cracks between the stone tiles. And the camera, the new one, mounted above the entrance archway, angled down, still blinking red. Installed the week after Thalia's last citation. I had objected, filed an appeal, cited the lack of board approval. Marla had called it a pilot privacy enhancement. I looked up into the lens. You'll want to know what came before the gunshot. You'll want to know the pattern, and I'll show it to you, piece by piece. But to do that, you need to understand this wasn't about rules. It never was. It started small. The first violation letter came 5 months ago. It was about chalk. Thalia had drawn a pair of koi fish across the sidewalk in front of our house. Soft pastels, nothing permanent. The letter said, unapproved outdoor markings. Please remove immediately. So I did. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to give them fuel. The second came when she sat on the edge of the fountain with her shoes off. Inappropriate contact with shared memorial property. Then it escalated. Unsupervised minor loitering. Disruption of visual consistency. That one was about her wearing a bright yellow windbreaker. I kept each letter. Not because I thought they'd matter in court, but because I knew this wasn't administrative. It was personal. Marla had decided who belonged and who didn't. And Thalia didn't. You'd think it would be obvious, the line between policy and persecution. But in HOA law, it's mud. There's no elected oversight. Just a loop of people like Marla, electing people like Marla, citing people like us. So I studied the charter, I traced the pattern, and every time I did, I saw Damon Creel's name beside hers. Seconded motions, silent approvals. Still, something about his voice lingered with me, like a wire under pressure, ready to snap. I'd known Damon longer than Marla. Back when the board was run by retirees, Damon had been the numbers guy. Soft-spoken, cautious. You don't get to VP without compromise, though. And I wondered, was this finally his threshold? I stood there under that new camera. The wind shifted. The trees behind the fountain stirred like they knew something I didn't. Then I turned back toward home. That's when I saw it, across the street, in Marla's yard. A new sign hammered into the mulch. We stand for safety. Printed in bold letters, framed in red. Thalia had stood for silence, for peace, for shade and stillness and paper and ink. And now, apparently, for disruption. But I had just begun. I had power, yes. But more than that, I had the truth. And the patience to see it break the surface. Damon Creel had never been a man of speed. Even in HOA meetings, when tensions rose and voices sharpened, he stayed still. Pen tapping softly, eyes down. He rarely spoke unless Marla gestured, as if he were just another extension of her will. But I remembered him before all this, back when Brindle Hollow was newer, quieter, when the board still held meetings over potluck dinners instead of behind closed doors and muted Zoom screens. He used to bring lemon bars. Now he brought silence. That night, Damon sat alone in his detached garage, the overhead light casting a pool of pale yellow across the metal table. His laptop screen blinked with a paused security feed. Marla's confrontation with Thalia played back frame by frame. His hands hovered over the spacebar, but he didn't press it. The sound was off. He didn't need it anymore. He'd watched it 9 times already. The gun, the sketchbook, the blood. He couldn't unsee it. He reached for the folder on his desk labeled Board Motions Archived. Inside were printed minutes from the last 18 months of HOA meetings, only the ones he'd saved in hard copy. Marla had insisted they go paperless after the lawsuit with the Morrises, when the neighborhood questioned how a wheelchair ramp counted as exterior damage. Damon had quietly kept his own records since then, just in case. Just in case never felt like this. He flipped to a motion from 6 months ago, Motion-18B, Installation of High Sensitivity Security Unit at Reflection Zone. The language was vague. He remembered that day. Marla had framed it as a response to increased outside traffic. What she didn't mention was that it followed 2 consecutive citations issued to Thalia for prolonged, unsupervised activity near the fountain. Damon had hesitated on that one. He'd looked around the room for someone else to object. No one had. And then Marla's eyes had locked onto his. Seconded? She'd asked. He had raised his hand. That hand felt heavy now. The garage was silent except for the dull hum of the freezer in the corner. Damon leaned back in the old plastic chair, arms crossed, the room too hot for comfort. Outside, the streetlights buzzed, and inside his head, something broke open. He pulled open the drawer beneath the desk and took out a black thumb drive. It had no label. He plugged it in. The files were sorted by date. Internal board meeting recordings. Raw Zoom footage, unedited. Marla had a habit of turning off the official record when things got sensitive, but Damon had once shown her how to record local backups. She never realized he hadn't disabled his own. He scrolled down to one labeled Session 48's Private Re, Minor Presence Patterns. The video began with the grainy view of Marla's home office. Her voice filled the space. She's always there, every day. Doesn't that unsettle anyone else? Another board member, Franklin maybe, had muttered something about kids being kids. Marla again. No, this one. She doesn't even react, just stares at the water or scribbles in that book. It's eerie. Damon remembered the way her tone had changed in that meeting. Less professional, more personal. Then Marla had said it. She poisons the image. I'll clear her like a pest if I have to. He paused the recording. That was the moment, the one he couldn't unhear. She'd said it months ago. And now she'd done it. Damon stood up, his knees cracking. The thumb drive stayed plugged in. His hand hovered over it, then slowly pulled back. Not yet, not tonight. Because the truth wasn't ready to be seen, not until he knew what Corwin planned to do. He didn't doubt the man's grief. He doubted his restraint. Judges weren't supposed to seek vengeance. But this wasn't about courtrooms. This was about a girl who sat silently with her sketchbook, and a woman who decided that was reason enough to end her. Damon looked again at the paused image on the monitor. Marla's arm outstretched, Thalia still, the sky blue and heartless above them. He shut the laptop. Then, for the first time in months, he stepped out of the garage, crossed the street barefoot, and stood at the edge of the Silver Grove fountain. No one was there, not even the sound of water. The pumps had been off since the incident. He stared at the space where Thalia had stood. He didn't know why, but his hand moved to his chest and rested there, flat, like a pledge. The same hand that had seconded the motion. This wasn't silence anymore. It was complicity. And Damon Creel had never hated silence more. I knew what would come next. The shooting wasn't the end of it. It was only the start of a colder war. One fought through clauses, subcommittees, and HOA-sanctioned statements. The kind that doesn't bleed in the streets but in inboxes and ordinances. At 7:03 a.m., the morning after Damon stood barefoot at the fountain, the HOA issued a new motion. Motion to expand community safety perimeter and visual regulation standards. It was signed by Marla Vexley and seconded by 2 junior board members I barely recognized, new residents recently appointed. They attached Thalia's name to the motion, not as a victim, as a justification. The phrasing was surgical. Recent events involving a minor in unauthorized areas have exposed potential weaknesses in our spatial oversight policies. They were using my niece's death to expand surveillance. At 7:08, the first text came through. "Corwin, are you seeing this?" It was from Elaine Marsh, a neighbor 2 blocks over. She'd never written to me before, not directly. Then another, "They just cited my kid for rollerblading near the drainage swale. Is this what it's going to be now?" By noon, 3 more. Our backyard swing was flagged for kinetic disturbance. What does that even mean? I didn't respond to any of them, not yet. The escalation had begun, and I needed to see how far Marla would take it before she overplayed her hand. At 12:47 p.m., I found the new sign. It wasn't in her yard this time. It was at the neighborhood entrance, right beneath the Brindle Hollow monument sign. A fresh white banner hung between 2 stone columns, crisp as a campaign ad. Brindle Hollow, preserving safety, enforcing peace. Enforcing. That word struck deeper than any bullet. It was the same word she used when she gave her statement to the press the night after Thalia died. I kept walking, trying to stay calm. Marla's tactics weren't spontaneous. They were tactical. Reframe the narrative. Tighten the grip. Trigger compliance. But her real mistake? She thought I was still grieving in silence. She didn't know I had already submitted a formal records request through the county clerk's office. The HOA charter had been filed improperly 2 years ago. Amendments passed without the 60% resident vote required for operational legitimacy. I hadn't acted on it before because I hadn't needed to. Now I did. Still, that would take time, and Marla wasn't slowing down. That evening, I stepped out to take the trash to the curb. 2 private security vehicles cruised slowly past my house, unmarked but familiar. Marla had insisted on hiring a third-party neighborhood enforcement liaison 2 months prior. Most residents thought it was about porch pirates. It wasn't. They didn't stop, but they watched. On my way back inside, I found another envelope tucked into the hedge. This one wasn't from the HOA. No seal, no address. Just a flash drive inside a folded napkin. My hands paused as I unfolded it. No note, no explanation. But I knew who it had to be. I didn't plug it in right away. I held it in my palm, weighing it like a truth that might cut in either direction. Inside, the house was dark. I walked into Thalia's room. Her lamp was still set to that warm, low hue she liked. Her desk was exactly as she left it. Pencils arranged by color, sketchbook open to the last page. The wind outside made the curtains breathe in and out like lungs. That's when I heard the knock. One sharp rap on the door. I opened it fast. No one. But at the base of the stairs sat a pair of red shoes. Children's shoes, Thalia's. I blinked hard, stepping forward, heart pounding, but they weren't hers. Not really. A neighbor's prank? No. Too cruel, too precise. Then I saw the tag. A clearance label from the local strip mall. Someone had staged this, not just to mock, but to warn. The HOA didn't just want order, they wanted erasure, and they didn't expect resistance. I picked up the shoes, stepped back inside, locked the door. Marla had no idea what I was preparing, but Damon Creel did, and I suspected his silence was about to become something much louder. I plugged in the flash. Drive just after midnight. Not in my home office, not on my laptop. I drove into town, parked 2 blocks from the 24-hour library, and used one of their public terminals. No sign-ins, no browser history, no connection to me. I didn't trust what I was about to see, and I knew better than to assume Damon Creel's conscience was enough to keep him clean. The files were unlabeled, just 6 video clips, time-stamped but not titled. I opened the one from 3 weeks ago. The footage was shaky, handheld, shot from a distance. A phone camera. It showed Marla standing with 2 other board members at the north trailhead near the fountain. I recognized the spot from Thalia's sketches, the curved trees, the iron railings. The audio was faint, but the words were clear enough. "She still shows up every day?" one voice asked. "She's like a weed," Marla replied, arms folded. "Won't stop growing unless you pull the roots." Another chuckled. "I'll give her 1 more week," Marla said. "Then I'll file a formal claim. Emotional disruption. We've used it before." I paused the video. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was something uglier. Intention. Repeated, deliberate harassment. Plans to fabricate claims. And a pattern of dehumanization. I opened the next file. This one was security footage, Marla's driveway. Time code 6:31 a.m., 2 days before the shooting. She was speaking with one of the neighborhood security contractors. He handed her a clipboard. She signed something. Then, this part froze me. She reached into her car and pulled out a small black case, handed it to him. He looked inside, hesitated, then nodded. No audio, but the body language was clean, a payoff, or prep. I needed the clipboard to confirm what it was, but I had enough to know Damon wasn't bluffing. I sat there, staring at the screen, thinking about how this started, not with bullets, with forms, citations, offhand remarks. Then it hit me. I ejected the flash drive and pulled up the Brindle Hollow website. It had been redesigned recently, flashier, more controlled. I clicked into the violations log, password protected, except not for me. I still had access from when I served on the board for 6 months after buying my home, before stepping down to focus on federal appointments. My credentials hadn't been revoked. I typed in my old login, and the archive opened like a wound. I filtered by keyword, minor, unsupervised, fountain. 37 entries, all about Thalia. They began almost a year ago. The language escalated each time. Unaccompanied minor, perceived loitering, unusual posture. One even noted possible emotional volatility. It read like a slow-motion smear campaign. They were building a case, not legally, psychologically, socially, conditioning the neighborhood to view Thalia as a threat. That was the power of bureaucracy. Quiet, lethal erosion. I printed everything, not from the library. Machine. I copied the logs to a second flash drive and drove 20 minutes out to a 24-hour shipping center, paid cash, and printed the full file on heavyweight paper. Then I mailed copies. One to my private P.O. box, one to my former law clerk in Atlanta, one to a legal contact I hadn't spoken to in years, an editor for a mid-sized publication that specialized in civil liberties and HOA reform. If they came for me, I wasn't the only one holding the match. By the time I got home, the sun was bleeding over the rooftops. The fountain's silhouette stretched long across the sidewalk. I passed by slowly. A new sign had been staked near the grass line. Security area expanded, trespassing prohibited beyond this point. It was aimed directly at the stones where Thalia used to sit. No one placed flowers. No one wrote her name in chalk. But I would. I bent down, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out her old red pencil, the one she used to draw cardinals. I knelt, found the dry groove in the concrete, and wrote just one word in the seam. Enough. Marla wanted quiet compliance. She was about to hear what the opposite sounded like. The morning after I wrote enough in the concrete, the message was gone. Scrubbed clean. Not just washed off, power washed. The cement was still wet when I passed the fountain on my run. A maintenance truck sat idling nearby, the worker pretending not to see me. It didn't matter. Marla thought she could erase what was written in stone just like she erased everything else, through policy, intimidation, and the myth of authority. But she was too late. The red pencil wasn't for her. It was for me, and for Damon Creel. Later that day, he texted me for the first time in 2 years. I have the HOA meeting logs, everything, from the private sessions. I stared at the message longer than I should have. It wasn't the offer, it was the implication. That he'd been holding them, that he'd waited, watched while it all unfolded. And now, when blood had already dried, he wanted to talk. I didn't reply. He texted again an hour later. There's audio, video. She said things we didn't include in the official records. I want to help, Corwin. That was when I called him. I didn't waste time on small talk. Why now? His voice was strained. Because she crossed a line I can't walk back from. No, she crossed it months ago, when you seconded the vote for visual profiling, when you backed the motion to restrict minor access to communal spaces. I know, he said quietly. I know I failed her. The silence stretched until I broke it. Where? North Overlook, after dark. You'll know which car is mine. I didn't trust him, not fully, but I knew the weight of complicity. I'd seen it in courtrooms, in plea deals, in the eyes of men who let things happen and only stepped forward when it cost them personally. Still, I went. The North Overlook sat at the edge of Brindle. Hollow, just past the tree line, where the pavement curled into gravel. Damon's sedan waited with its lights off, engine silent. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, a man waiting for judgment. I got in the passenger seat without a word. He handed me a hard drive, unlabeled, sealed in a Ziploc bag. "There's a backup in my safety deposit box," he said. "If anything happens to me—" "Don't get poetic," I snapped. "Tell me what's on it." Everything she didn't want archived, raw Zoom files, off-record audio, her voice, Corwin, clear as glass. I studied him in the dim light. His face was drawn, older than I remembered. His collar was crooked, like he'd dressed in a hurry and forgot how to look composed. "She used you," I said. "I let her." "Why?" He looked out the windshield. "She scared me. Not with threats, with her certainty. You've met people like that. People who never question themselves. She convinced me it was about protecting the community, keeping peace. But it was always about control." I tucked the drive into my coat pocket. "She'll come for you next." "I know." As I opened the door to leave, he added one last thing. "She called the cameras optics tools, said if you aim them long enough, people start to believe what they see." That night, I sat at my desk and opened the files. The first clip was a video titled Board Prelim, March 22. Uncut. Marla sat in her home office, framed by perfectly arranged books and a framed HOA certification. She spoke directly to the board. "This is not about one girl. This is about setting precedent. If we allow erratic behavior in shared spaces, any deviation from the expected, we unravel the whole model. She draws attention. That's disruptive. That's enough." I paused the video, then rewound, played it again, listened to the rhythm in her voice, clinical, rehearsed, utterly devoid of empathy. This wasn't negligence. This was ideology. I opened the second clip. It was shorter. "She's not ours," Marla said. "Her blood isn't in this neighborhood's roots." And there it was. The belief that certain people didn't belong, that some children were acceptable casualties in the name of order. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She thought HOA law was a shield. She hadn't prepared for what it looked like when the law started pushing back. Damon didn't text again. He didn't have to. The hard drive spoke louder than he ever could. I spent the next 2 days parsing everything, meeting logs, time-stamped video, unedited audio from off-record sessions. All of it stored in a tangled mess of folder names like draft edits and retain, don't retain. The most damning clip was buried inside a mislabeled directory called HOA Summary Audio Notes. It wasn't a summary. It was a recording Marla made during a private board preparation meeting, just her and a junior. Board member, Regina Feld. Regina. "The neighbors might ask questions." Marla. "Then we redirect, make it about procedure. People accept cruelty when you wrap it in a form." I paused the file. I could feel it, my pulse heavy in my neck. The tempo of something bigger taking shape. This wasn't just negligence. This was narrative engineering. She had been seeding doubt about Thalia for nearly a year, one HOA clause at a time. But I wasn't alone now. Damon had crossed the line, quietly but fully. He gave me one more gift. A private folder of Marla-only drafts, proposed amendments she had written herself, never passed, but saved with detailed comments like, "use if optics allow," or "good to frame after an incident." One of them was chilling. Proposed clause. Any minor exhibiting behavior that deviates from community standards of engagement, EIG, loitering without verbal exchange, repetitive motion, refusal to respond to instruction, may be flagged for safety reassessment and parent-guardian notification. She never submitted it, but she didn't have to. She enacted it through whispers, citations, and implied threat. I printed that one, highlighted it, clipped it to the others. Then I made a call. Jacob Mendez, civil rights editor at the Reform Ledger, a watchdog publication focused on overreach in suburban governing bodies. He was the one person I knew who could thread this story without sensationalizing it. He answered on the first ring. "Corwin? It's time," I said. "I have files, source footage. You'll need to vet it all." Silence. Then, "Is it as bad as I've heard?" "Worse." He didn't ask for context, just gave me a secure upload portal and told me to give him 72 hours. That evening, as the sun dropped over Brindle Hollow, I stepped into the one place I hadn't returned to since the day of the shooting. Thalia's room. The scent was still there. Soft lavender, pencil shavings, faint paper. Her slippers sat under the bed like she'd return for them any minute. Her desk lamp was off, but I turned it on. Low warmth, the same setting she used when she didn't want the shadows to move too much. I sat down and opened her last sketchbook. The final drawing was a fountain, not ours, but something similar. A willow tree in the background, a bird on the rim, and two shoes by the edge, not drawn like they were lost, drawn like someone had stepped out of them on purpose. She never got to finish it. The lines faded midway through the bird's wing. I closed the book, took a breath. Then I stood up, walked to my study, and laid out everything. HOA citations, meeting logs, Marla's private memos, the screenshots of Thalia's violations over 12 months, the video still of her standing barefoot, sketchbook in hand, seconds before she was shot. And then, in the center, I placed a photo of Thalia, one of the few where she was smiling fully, eyes clear, sun hitting her face just right. This wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about exorcism. The system Marla built wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as she designed it, self-reinforcing, unaccountable, wrapped in procedural legitimacy. But once the public saw behind the glass, it would shatter. I printed a label and stuck it across the front of the envelope I would mail to Jacob the next morning. Brindle Hollow, designed to silence. Because that's what it had done. I didn't sleep that night. The files were ready. The upload to Jacob was complete. The redundancy backups encrypted and split between cloud servers and physical drives in locations I didn't list. I wasn't just being cautious, I was preparing for war. Marla Vexley didn't know it yet, but every word she ever said in those off-record meetings was about to burn through the polished glass she hid behind. Still, this wasn't over. Exposure didn't start with a single broadcast. It had to be built like a courtroom case, visceral, credible, airtight. So I spent the next 20 hours crafting the war chest. I started with the narrative brief, a clean chronological summary of Thalia's citation history, lined up with HOA policy timestamps and the correlating public meetings. I labeled every inconsistency, highlighted every moment the policy was twisted just enough to mean something it was never written to do. I didn't dramatize it. I let the cold logic speak for itself. Next came the footage binder. I stripped out 5 short clips, under 30 seconds each, from the drive Damon gave me. One showed Marla saying the word weed in reference to Thalia. Another captured her, referring to Thalia's silence as unnerving. A third showed the camera system installation, the week before the shooting, without board approval. But it was the fourth that mattered most. Audio only. Marla, calm, composed, and clear. If a child can make this place feel less secure, then the child's presence is the problem, not the rules. I didn't have to explain what that meant. It explained itself. The last clip was the public camera footage, the shooting. I trimmed it to 12 seconds. The approach, the shout, the pause, the shot. I'd watched it only twice. I would never watch it again. I organized every file into a zip called Operation Mirror Light. It was a name I had scribbled on a sticky note 3 days after the funeral, a name for something I hadn't known I'd need, until now. Once the file set was complete, I did what I hadn't done in a long time. I returned to court, not to my bench, not to chambers, but to the federal courthouse media wing. There, deep in the archives, I still had contacts, legal press, documentarians, reporters who remembered what it was like to take on impossible stories and still believe the system had teeth. I reached out to Nina Kroll, an investigative producer who once built a case against a corrupt city zoning board that made national headlines. She answered my call within 3 rings. "Corwin," she said, confused, "I haven't heard your voice in 6 years." "You're about to hear a lot more," I said. "I'm activating a drop. It's about an HOA murder case." "You're the judge on it?" "No," I said. "I'm the uncle, the guardian, the witness, and the last person standing who still cares if the girl's story is told straight." She paused. I let the weight sit. "I'll open it tonight," she said. After that, I called two former students, one now clerking in the 11th, the other working in civil code litigation for a nonprofit. I gave them only what they needed, scrubbed the HOA bylaws and all public filings for inconsistencies, incorporation errors, and voting violations. I knew they'd find them because I had written the original templates. Brindle Hollow's legal foundation was rotting. It just needed the right boot to make it collapse. By midnight, the hashtag started surfacing. Justice for Thalia. I hadn't posted anything. Neither had Damon. Neither had Jacob. But Nina had. Her teaser read, "Coming Monday, the HOA that erased a child's life to protect a fountain, and the judge who made sure the world would watch." Underneath it, a freeze frame of Marla mid-speech, caught blinking, caught unready. By morning, the story had reached local press. By noon, national. The HOA's site went offline by 2 p.m., citing traffic load issues. And at 4:17 p.m., I received an email from brindlehollow.admin.boardogmail.com. Subject, urgent meeting request, media concerns. I didn't open it because they weren't asking to fix anything. They were asking to negotiate survival, and I hadn't finished showing them what justice looks like. By the time the email arrived, it was already too late for them. The story had breached every gate. Jacob's article was live on the Reform Ledger, titled "The HOA That Killed a Child in the Name of Order." It detailed the systematic pattern of targeted enforcement, the manipulated charter votes, and the lethal outcome of manufactured fear. It included the clips, the quotes, Thalia's name in bold, and it didn't just stay in print. News anchors repeated Marla's words on national television. "She poisons the image. I'll clear her like a pest." They played it 3 times in one segment. At first, Brindle Hollow tried to deny it. They released a brief statement through a newly hired PR firm, bland, impersonal, with no direct reference to Thalia's death. But they underestimated the public's response. This wasn't just a local HOA scandal anymore. It was a referendum on the unchecked power of private communities across the country. Parents, advocates, disability rights organizations. They all joined in. By the 3rd day, the state attorney general announced a formal investigation into the HOA's governance practices. That same night, I activated the last phase of my plan. Community rupture. It wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about collapsing the internal system Marla had built, the one that kept neighbors silent and afraid. So I called every resident who had reached out to me after the shooting, all the texts, the quiet murmurs of support. I asked them to meet me, one-on-one, not to talk, but to listen. I didn't offer rage. I gave them receipts. I showed them the emails, the citations filed under fake headers, the way their own children had been flagged in HOA records, and how many of them, without knowing, had seconded motions that targeted Thalia by name. No one walked away without shaking. Then I handed them copies of their own HOA membership terms, highlighted the clause they'd all forgotten. Any member may petition for a vote of no confidence in the acting board, provided 10% of households co-sign the motion. I asked for signatures. I got more than enough. By the end of the week, 33 homeowners signed the petition. That's when Marla started slipping. She called an emergency board meeting, virtual only, no open forum, claimed it was for safety. But the Zoom link leaked within minutes, and nearly half the community joined as silent observers. She didn't see me on the call, but I was there. And so was Damon. He didn't speak. Not until the final agenda item. "Madam President," he said, voice steady but low, "we need to address the petition." Marla's eyes narrowed. "This meeting is not about false narratives." "It's not false," he replied. "The signatures are valid, and under Section 7.1 of our charter, the board is required to call a vote within 7 days. Marla's mask cracked. "I will not allow this board to be overtaken by mob sentiment." "It's not a mob," Damon said. "It's your neighbors, and we're done being afraid of you." She ended the meeting without adjournment. The next morning, flyers were posted on every mailbox. Community town hall, petition hearing. Saturday, Osterway 5 p.m., community center pavilion. It wasn't official, not yet, but it didn't need to be. The homeowners were organizing without her, and I was helping. While Marla scrambled to keep control, I coordinated with legal counsel to initiate a parallel motion, petition for state oversight of Brindle Hollow HOA, citing ADA violations, discriminatory enforcement patterns, and civil negligence in connection to a fatality. We included all supporting evidence, and we filed it publicly. Marla didn't show her face for 3 days, but on the 4th morning, I opened my front door to find a manila envelope lying flat on the welcome mat. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photo. Thalia, sitting on the fountain ledge, drawing, sunlight on her shoulders. It was one I hadn't taken. On the back, in pen, "She made this place beautiful. I'm sorry it took me this long." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. Damon. The system had cracked. Now, it was time to break it. The town hall didn't start with shouting. It started with chairs scraping pavement and people sitting farther apart than they used to. 5 o'clock sharp, under the pavilion strung with HOA-issued holiday lights, the residents of Brindle Hollow arrived. Some held coffee, some wore sunglasses despite the cloud cover, and some, like me, carried files. Not folders, files. Marla didn't show up. Her seat at the center table remained empty, though the printed sign in front of it still read, Marla Vexley, Board President. Damon sat 2 seats down, visibly thinner than weeks before, collar wrinkled, shoulders squared. He didn't look nervous. He looked resigned. The treasurer, Cynthia Lorne, opened with a statement that didn't mention Thalia. She referenced community tension, recent media attention, and misinformation targeting the HOA's mission. She reminded everyone of the HOA's decades of careful stewardship. I stood when she finished. "No one's here to review landscaping," I said. "We're here because a 13-year-old girl was shot to death by a woman whose power you all upheld." That cracked the silence. A few neighbors shifted. Some lowered their eyes. But no one interrupted. I turned toward the crowd and held up the document packet. "This is a timeline of every violation issued to Thalia Torrell, 37 over 13 months, most for behavior no different from any child in this neighborhood. Sketching, sitting, wearing color." Damon lowered his eyes. I continued. "This is the transcript of a board meeting where Marla refers to her as a weed. This is audio of her stating on record that she'd clear her like a pest." I placed the packet on the table, then laid a second beside it. "This is the HOA charter. It requires a 60% vote for any structural bylaw change. But since 2021, 6 amendments were passed without it, including the one Marla used to install surveillance cameras without community consent." Someone coughed near the back. A man in a windbreaker raised his hand. "What does this mean for us?" he asked. "It means," I said, "your rights were compromised. Your votes were bypassed. Your children were monitored under unlawful policy. And when someone finally got hurt, they tried to frame it as safety enforcement." Elaine Marsh stood next. "My son got cited last year for rollerblading. I thought it was nothing. Now I'm wondering if they had a list." "They did," I said, turning back to the table. "A list of unusual behaviors, language used in Marla's own drafts. And she enforced it." Damon stood beside me, slowly, without paper. "I seconded the vote on the fountain cameras," he said. "I didn't know she'd use them to target a child. I thought it was about deterring theft, but I looked away too long. I won't do that again." No one clapped, but no one walked away either. Then the unexpected happened. Marla arrived, late, alone, no entourage, no smugness. Just a pressed blazer and her name badge clipped over it, as if costume could still protect her. She didn't sit. She marched up the pavilion steps and faced the crowd. "I understand emotions are high," she began, "but we cannot allow grief to override governance. This HOA has operated with transparency and legality. What happened was tragic, but it wasn't murder." People murmured. "It was self-defense," she added. That's when I stepped forward. "Is this your voice?" I asked, playing a clip from my phone, Marla's voice. "If a child can make this place feel less secure, then the child's presence is the problem." She stiffened. "It was taken out of context," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. "Here's more context," I said, and played the second clip, the one with, "She's not ours. Her blood isn't in this neighborhood's roots." A man in the front stood. "Is that what you think of my daughter?" Another voice. "You said this was about safety." Marla opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. She looked around and realized, maybe for the first time, that she was outnumbered. Not by volume, by clarity. Damon leaned toward her and whispered something I couldn't hear. She turned, walked down the steps, and left. Behind her, the board sat stunned. No one stopped her. Not one person. Because the story had already moved past her, and it wasn't finished yet. Marla didn't come back the next day. Or the next. By the third morning, her blinds were drawn and her mailbox was overstuffed. One of the neighbors said they saw a moving truck arrive after midnight. Another claimed she was hiding in a relative's home across county lines. No one knew for sure, and no one seemed eager to find out. But I knew what was coming. The storm wasn't just local anymore. The state had moved faster than I expected. The media coverage, paired with the civil rights violations, ADA breaches, and improperly executed bylaw amendments, was enough to trigger something rare: formal state intervention in a private HOA. It started with a knock at the boardroom door. I was there, seated in the back row of the Brindle Hollow Community Center, when it opened and two officials from the State Civil Governance Oversight Division stepped in, blazers, clipboards, and state seals on their jackets. One of them, an attorney named Yvette Cole, called the meeting to order before the board could even finish introductions. "I'm invoking emergency review authority under Statute 14402, she said. "Your governing documents have been preliminarily assessed and found to lack sufficient voting compliance and transparency. Until further review, all HOA enforcement activities are suspended." Gasps rippled through the rows of residents. Yvette didn't flinch. "You are not being disbanded yet. You are being frozen. No citations, no fines, no gate. Code policy updates. Nothing. Not until we get to the bottom of this." The board sat stunned. Cynthia Lorne blinked like her contacts had dried out. The treasurer tried to ask if the new landscaping initiative was still going to be funded. "No," Yvette replied. They tried to pivot, asked if this was about Marla specifically, if the state was acting on bias or public pressure. Yvette reached into her folder and placed a printed still on the table, a picture of Thalia, taken from HOA surveillance, Marla's own system. The girl was seated, pencil in hand, looking down. No disruption, no damage, just a child, existing. "This was the subject of 37 citations," Yvette said. "If that number doesn't disturb you, it should." Behind me, I heard a sniffle. Elaine Marsh wiped her eyes. Yvette wasn't done. "We have audio logs, video, witness statements. We are considering a full criminal referral for civil rights violations, abuse of discretionary power, and reckless endangerment through hostile policy creation." Then she turned to face the residents directly. "You voted for leadership, but what followed was not leadership. It was slow-motion suffocation disguised as decorum." She stepped aside. "This hearing is now open to public comment." I didn't plan to speak, but I did. I walked to the front, stood where Marla had once lorded over garden disputes and bike citations, and placed my palm on the table. "My niece wasn't a threat," I said. "She wasn't an activist. She wasn't some symbol. She was a child. She liked trees. She liked quiet. She liked drawing birds and benches and flowers that only bloomed for 1 week a year." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She was targeted not for what she did, but for what she didn't conform to. She didn't chatter. She didn't obey the unspoken rules of silence and symmetry that this place wrapped in law. I held up a photo. Thalia, standing beside the Silver Grove fountain, hair in her eyes, smiling the smallest smile. I've spent my career writing decisions that shape constitutional interpretation, but I've never seen anything so plainly unconstitutional as the fear that ruled this place, and that ends now. A long silence followed. Then Damon stood. He didn't speak to me. He didn't speak to the board. He turned to the neighbors he'd lived among for 15 years and said, "We let her do it, we saw it, we looked away. That's not order, that's cowardice." Then he walked out. By the end of the hearing, the entire board had been suspended pending formal audit. The fountain was closed to foot traffic, cordoned off with yellow tape, not because it was unsafe, because it was evidence. And just like that, the neighborhood that once cited a child for sitting too quietly had to sit still themselves and listen. When the verdict came down, it wasn't just words on paper. It was sound, the thud of the gavel echoing through the marble chambers of the state courthouse. I stood in the back, hands clasped, jaw locked, listening as the clerk read every count aloud. Marla Vexley, former president of the Brindle Hollow Homeowners Association, was found guilty on all charges: second-degree murder, civil rights violations under ADA statute, and misuse of public safety policy resulting in fatal harm. The sentence was life without parole. The crowd in the gallery was silent. Even the reporters paused. You could almost feel the weight shift in the air, the kind that happens when justice finally stops being theoretical. Marla didn't speak when the judge asked if she had anything to say. She just looked forward, pale, lips pressed tight, as if she still believed this was temporary, as if she'd walk out one day and rewrite her own story. But this time, the law didn't bend around her. It crushed her. When the officers let her out, she turned her head for the first time in weeks, scanning the room. Our eyes met. For a moment, I wondered if she saw the same thing I did. Not vengeance, not victory, but the hollow recognition that her empire of order had collapsed into ruin. She looked smaller than I remembered. Then she was gone. Outside the courthouse, the world had already shifted. Protesters held signs reading, "End HOA Abuse" and "Justice for Thalia." Cameras flashed. Journalists called my name, but I didn't stop for interviews. I walked past them to the waiting car where Damon stood leaning against the door, a man trying to reconcile guilt with gratitude. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We drove back to Brindle Hollow in silence. The gates were open now. Literally, the board had been dissolved. The neighborhood's bylaws transferred into temporary public management until residents could vote on a restructured system. The Silver Grove fountain sat ahead, untouched since the investigation began. The police tape was gone. The water ran again for the first time in 6 months, clear and steady. Someone had planted dogwood saplings around the base. Damon parked and stepped out. He looked toward the water, then at me. "They're renaming it," he said quietly. "The council voted this morning." I nodded. "I know." A small crowd had gathered near the fountain's edge, neighbors, reporters, a few children. A new plaque gleamed against the stone. Thalia's Grove. Below it, for every voice that was silenced, the words hit me harder than I expected. My throat closed up. Elaine Marsh approached with her son. She handed me a small folded paper. Inside was a sketch, a recreation of Thalia's final drawing. The fountain, the bird, the shoes at the edge. Her son had drawn it himself. "She used to let me sit with her," he said softly. "She said stillness wasn't emptiness. It was listening." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. As the crowd dispersed, Damon stayed behind. "You did it," he said. "No," I replied. "She did." He frowned. "Thalia..." Her silence started a storm. I just made sure people heard it. He gave a small nod. "What happens now?" "Now?" I looked up at the fountain, at the water catching light. "Now I build something that outlives this place." And I did. 3 months later, the Thalia Torrell Foundation for Civic Accountability launched its first program, offering free legal counsel to families facing HOA harassment and unjust code enforcement. The first case we took wasn't even in Georgia. It was in Texas. A single mother fined for letting her autistic son draw chalk on their driveway. When she won her appeal, she sent me a message. "Tell Thalia thank you." I printed it and placed it inside her old sketchbook. At night, when the house grew quiet, I'd sometimes catch myself turning toward the fountain through the window, half expecting to see her, barefoot, pencil in hand, sketching the ripples in the water. I don't know if justice ever balances the scales, but truth leaves cracks that light can still find its way through. So, if you're reading this and you've ever been silenced, erased, or told you didn't belong in your own home, don't look down. Look up. Because the walls built to contain people like you only stand until someone starts telling the story out loud. If you believe what happened here should never happen anywhere again, share a story. Tell it louder. Tell it until every neighborhood, every rulebook, every false authority trembles at the sound of it.